to the best prequel. May 19, 2005, the most hyped film of the year is being showcased at your local theater. Sure, the last two didn't receive a positive review from fans, but many were still excited to see the absolute beast Anakin was during his fall. Now look at that, a first PG-13 Star Wars movie. That could only mean one thing.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Everyone, or 90% of the pie, will agree whether you're a fan of the old or the new, Revenge of the Sith was and will always be the better of the prequels. But why and how? Well, I'm glad you asked that. It's simple. It's far better structured, it has a more consistent tone, better characterization, and key pieces to further develop certain relationships that felt underdeveloped in the last two. The effects, come on. It wasn't the Godfather treatment, just fans didn't switch on to a similar reaction they did with The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. So yeah, it's not a perfect reaction, there are issues. I'm not denying that at all.
So love has blinded you.
But it's still unreal that it took till the third film to finally make a Star Wars prequel, to put in better terms, well liked. From the cinematic opening to the manipulation from Palpatine putting Ian McDiarmid on the high forefront, to the climax of Anakin wanting to be a genocidal maniac in order to save his wife, but ends up getting cooked like food that was made in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen.
Good fucking food.
A much more darker ending when comparing to the other 9, and the tone is certainly far more darker and much better and fine line than The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, which had their own fair share of inconsistent tones.
Don't do that again.
George viewed the entire 6-film saga as one big 12-hour cut of a film, where we see the journey of Anakin's descent to redemption, with many storylines playing a huge part, which you gotta give George credit, he upped the ante with the third one. Instead of rushing to complete the film, even if the previous two weren't up to par, but let's see how well the prequels conclude the story of Anakin Skywalker being the chosen one. Oh. A great way to kick off your film is with the badass structured opening, laying out the stakes of the film in the current involved situation. Let's just get the elephant out of the room. The effects look 10 times crispier, and this is all blue screen, so the film already does a neat job of improving its effects. Cause from the last one, oh god, we all remember this scene, with Anakin and Obi-Wan surging to the Capitol with the two bickering one another, a very nice overtone of their bond as brothers in arms, the very pieces which we were missing out from the Attack Clones. Just moments where the two don't have arguments, whether or not Anakin is banging the senator.
He's holding me back!
Or if he missed a force lesson, some shit like that. Just the two talking about the here and now. No worries despite yet trying to rescue the Chancellor.
Hold on, Anakin. You're gonna get us both killed.
The two knights crashed their retrospective ships and easily sliced through the droids like it was the simulation. The film implies the deep bond the two have given the heavy toll the war has committed. It only brought the two together, seeing many sides that we haven't seen before. Getting a better understanding, just a bit of fun. And nothing too serious. Originally the opening was planned for it to be an hour long, of rescuing the Emperor, so I took the effort to do a bit of hunting on YouTube. I uncovered several of those scenes which were cut from the final product. Evidently dragging out your opening for 1 hour would simultaneously destroy your pace, most of the time, especially for a situation where it's a rescue mission which isn't part of an overarching story. What you see on screen is the director's cut. George cut those scenes out to have a better flow for the film. But it's also neat to know how important George wanted to imply the relationship with Anakin and Obi-Wan is far more than student and master. And they have an actual friendship where you see many positive sides. A lot of the dialogue feels natural, not hollow wood, and far more clear than Hayden and Ewan being flat with their lines.
9th time. That business on Cato Nemoidia doesn't count.
Nevertheless, I can agree that what we got certainly played perfectly into build-up of Anakin's descent, wrapping many blurred lines that weren't really covered in the trilogy. Also, during my search, I learned Anakin vs. Dooku was supposed to be much longer, like way longer. Hayden put a lot of work into this duel, only for 90% of it to be cut out. Now seeing the much more advanced fighting style and far more resilient compared to their last outing, giving us prime Anakin. Before all of this, not only developing the character itself, but the way they fight, how they approach their battle before and after. I mean, training for a fight scene for 3 months, doing these sick ass moves, showcasing yourself at your best, before you become the most evil man in the galaxy who isn't the Emperor, only for George to flip that script and say, it's only gonna be 2 minutes. It's all part of the movie making business. It sucks, but just from much more wider perspective, it would have really benefited more of seeing, you know, that man is scary good. It's like when Undertaker was preparing for a 20-minute match with John Cena only for it to be a squash match that lasts 30 seconds. Must have sucked. But what can you do? It's all about what works and what doesn't. The middle act was certainly carried by the big villain of this film. This is Palpatine at his best, even though hilarious at times with his line delivery, corny and cheesy in some cases, but I fucking love it. Shows the very distinctiveness in his character and how he approaches himself, gloating about his power when striking Windu out of the window. Or whether he's manipulating Anakin, giving him the little jabs of how bigger the Sith are. Or when he's manipulating Anakin, giving him the little jabs of how much bigger the Sith are than the Jedi see them as. With the struggle of developing Anakin and Padme's relationship, don't get me wrong, it's much better in this film than what we got for the I Don't Like Sand in Attack of the Clones. But unfortunately, the many problems with George Lucas's love dialogue are pretty much still present and out of place every so often. Just because the way the middle act is carried may have knocked this film down a few pegs than what I already have it as, if the film scarcely scratched the surface for Palpatine, who we barely saw as Sidious in the last 2 films. George said fuck it and showcased Ian like he was at a car show, him being the car. Palpatine realizing the war is soon to be over after forcing Anakin to kill Dooku right before him, and Grievous fleeing all the way to Utapau, Palpatine uses this very vulnerable time to finally strike towards Anakin and groom him to become a Sith Lord, who conveniently had a night terror of his dying wife, so Palpatine tells him a story of Darth Plagueis, who manipulated the midichlorians to create life, who cleverly killed his old master to further one of his teachings. Yes, I know this wonderful book isn't canon anymore, but that very simple head tilt in the scene towards his future apprentice when he said,
To create life.
pretty much signals Anakin was indeed conceived by the Force through Plagueis' methods. While the Jedi constantly bicker on who the Sith Lord is while not realizing there's one right under their nose, but it also seems that Palpatine used some power to keep himself hidden, while Yoda was constantly talking riddles on who this clear Sith is. But despite Palpatine being a prominent figure in the middle act, let's not ignore that the 3 secondary villains, Maul, Grievous, and Dooku throughout the trilogy, haven't been really well developed. The films simply didn't treat them as high standard, being utilized as props for a bigger power. A bit disappointing with so many of these cool concepts and effort put into these cool ass designs, adding mystic to them which the films unfortunately couldn't capitalize, given how much needed to be covered in this entire trilogy, while forcing on the key moments leading to the birth of Darth Vader. Now this isn't a Snoke-esque situation where the big bad is treated as a mystery and well, we know what happened, throwing theory videos out of the window. But for villains like Maul, Dooku, and Grievous, sure, a bit more outlook on these characters would have benefited on the level of threat in these films, and not just baseless side pieces for Palpatine to just play around with. Mercifully enough, the Clone Wars added so many layers to these villains, not so much with Grievous. I mean, 2003 Grievous just simply clears 3D animated General Grievous. For Maul and Dooku, Palpatine might have been the main course for George Lucas, but he needed a little spice into those side dishes. In another show, I mean, Maul is my favorite villain now who isn't named Darth Vader.
I am so fucking ready.
Empire Strikes Back will always be my favorite film in the saga. Return of the Jedi will always have my favorite final shot. Revenge Sith will always have my favorite final hour to a Star Wars movie. The climax is just well crafted because how dreaded it feels. A final moment between Obi-Wan and Anakin saying their goodbyes before Obi-Wan sees his buddy kill a bunch of kids. Anakin, after getting the sit-down kid from Windu, he seems a bit upset and confused, so he goes to the right man who will acknowledge him. Palpatine finds this opportunity to utilize Anakin's mentally vulnerable state and reveal himself as the Sith Lord. And the nail in the coffin, he tells this very emotional, vulnerable man that he has the power to save Padme
From certain death.
Anakin, not questioning such a bold claim created from a story, hesitates, and man, you can tell Ian is having so much fun with this character. Just such distinctiveness and breath of fresh air from wooden monotone dialogue we are so used to. Another strength from George is diving these characters, making sure their personalities are completely different, whether it's the way they bring themselves or the way they speak. A job well done.
So uncivilized.
After another sit-down kid moment from Mace Windu, he brings 3 Jedi from the Council who are seen to be powerful, only to get completely obliterated by Palpatine. Where the fuck are you looking at? Behind the scenes, given Ian's age and him being in less physical condition compared to Samuel L. Jackson. So yeah, there were a lot of takes for the scene, cause Ian was either getting whacked or he was doing the whacking. So a lot of the big moments in the fight, they had to use CGI Ian, just like what they did with Christopher Lee in Attack of the Clones. Windu pins Palpatine against the wall. Did he win, or was Palpatine just not trying? And Windu was that legitimately strong? Who knows? Anakin sees the two after staring across the sunset, and he must choose. Shriveled powerful man, or Windu, your ally for so many... Oh, okay. Anakin pledging himself, getting manipulated to side with Palpatine, who knights him to become Darth Vader. A known criticism for this turn is what happens after this iconic scene. Anakin going ballistic, no build-up, sees a kid, dead. Sees a friend for so many years, dead. An old lady, dead. Okay, yeah, that's from a game, but the point still stands. Now grabbing my shield and sword, this sudden act of bloodlust is completely in character. Whether the Clone Wars or this trilogy, Anakin is known for acting without thinking in situations. So convoluted for saving his wife, he's known to not care unless the easiest solution, true or not, can heal him. On face value, the scene does look a bit jarring, but added context, it makes complete sense. Order 66 has commenced due to the inhibitor chip's sudden turn in clones without questioning. Thank you for the Clone Wars on adding better context to this scene. Jedi being gunned down, just calmness with Williams' score. We are in the peak of the prequels. Obi-Wan and Yoda reunite and infiltrate the temple, taking on the clones. And this is where Obi-Wan learned that Anakin has turned into a psychotic killing machine that won't hesitate to murder a kid as well. He seeks permission to face Palpatine, but Yoda knows he's too weak and is better off facing someone who he knows well, and his defensive form is much more suited for Anakin's Form 5. Anakin, after finally killing all of the annoying Separatist leaders, realizes he's far gone. I love the little regret in his eyes when he starts crying. Adds more layers to his turn, similar reference to his regret killing the Tusken Raiders out of spite and anger, but what's been done, it's been done. He got the taste of power that he's been dreaming of. Obi-Wan visits Padme to seek Skywalker's location, but a pregnant Padme doesn't believe Anakin can commit such an act, despite his actions in Attack of Clones can prove otherwise. Obi-Wan pretty much admits that I'm gonna kill the father of your child.
I'm so sorry.
And plans to follow Padme to Anakin so they can duke it out, despite an already determined conclusion given the original trilogy.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault.
He chokes out the person he was trying to save. Anakin has gone full unhinged, blaming everything on Obi-Wan and not on himself.
Not take it from me!
Yeah, and the dialogue for this scene does feel forced, and the delivery does feel odd at times, but that's more on directing leading to odd delivery and choice of dialogue that's being used. On top of that, the wooden acting, which I find very funny because in other films, Kaden is capable of charismatic acting, even recently. And watching the Clone Wars and the emotion behind Matt Lander's delivery versus Hayden, all you can see is two different Anakin Skywalkers. And that's why I say I think it's more of George's directing than Hayden's delivery.
I'm joking.
You're joking.
I mean, who else decided to keep the power converters line anyways?
Want them cleaned up for dinner.
But I was going into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters.
Back to the topic of conversation, Anakin and Obi-Wan duel it out for a good 10 minutes. I respect heavily that Hayden and Ewan trained for months and did 90% of this choreography. Thankfully, George didn't trim it like he did with the Dooku fight, so what we see is what they practice, and this right here feels like the final battle, determined two fates. You could say duel of fates. The atmosphere perfect, the score perfect, Anakin and Obi-Wan's argument when floating on the rocks perfect. What's that word called? Oh yeah, cinema. This fight, Darth Vader versus Luke from Return of the Jedi, the Empire Strikes Back duel, are easily the top 3 saber fights of all time. Sure, Duel of Fates was awesome based on choreography standpoint, but when you mix storytelling into the batch, nothing's compared to these 3.
This is the end for you, my master.
The resentment Anakin has towards his former friends ends up being his downfall, which is a very neat parallel to Duel Face, believing he can achieve what Obi-Wan did, which Obi-Wan believes it's a mistake that Anakin is about to commit, and cuts his old friend like a gourmet chef and leaves him to get burnt by the hot lava. A very nice shot where we get to see Obi-Wan pick up the lightsaber from the charred ground, which he later gives on to Luke Skywalker, which follows another beautiful shot scene of the birth of Darth Vader and the birth of his children. A look of what the fuck is going to happen on Anakin Skywalker as the mask comes down. On the other side, Padme dies of a broken heart as she lost the will to live. I mean, she does have kids, so I guess she kind of does have the will to live, but that's the thing with George, he does too much when he doesn't need to. George is always going to be his worst enemy at times. So Jesus, even Darth Vader screaming no was unnecessary. Let the mask do the talking, show the disgruntled betrayal through his voice. The original cut of The Return of the Jedi purely exemplifies what his thoughts were through the lenses. But don't worry, George needed to change that as well.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Nevertheless, Yoda and Obi-Wan decide to split the children, Leia being adopted to the Organos. Not a great end to that family.
I need a major timeout here!
And Luke lives with his adopted family on Tatooine because we know how much Anakin hates Sin and does not like that planet given the history he has over there. A very nice ending to the prequels, which is littered with many disappointments early on, but better to end it with a positive feel. To get rid of two elephants in the room, this movie is nowhere near as a masterpiece, the way the online fans like to treat it as recently.
Oh dear.
Or has the qualities the original trilogy possessed, but never failed to realize that this movie didn't need to be or live up to the original trilogy. A simple good movie is all it should be. It does have its faults, which in the beginning was already going to be a tragedy, a nice creative direction where a trilogy ends on a bad note, in a good way by the way, but there's always going to be that glint of hope when you see those two sons. When you really look at the entire scope, when you ignore direction, ignore the faults of George and his team executed with this film, the concept was far much better and much more intriguing than the original trilogy. Not diminishing what the original trilogy accomplished by the way, but the prequels had far more of a bigger and a wider feel with a complex story. Of a boy brought in with high standards but immediately reaches the pinnacle point of a conflict and must adapt to these customs he's not familiar with.
What?
But execution at the end of the day wins you everything. It's like coming up with a competent strategy in a sports game to shut down the best team, but it's how the players adapt to this very strategy. Better execution will only show you the results you want. The prequels couldn't be far from this. Great story, not a great execution, but I'll give George a credit where the sequels failed to do so. Is constantly backtrack each film, pleasing fans missing your story mark. He realizes mistakes and what he can fix without disrupting the story and just lets it all play out. No switcheroo on who the main antagonist is. No changing character stories, breaking the fundamentals of competence on who drives the narrative. None of that. He knew it and went with it. Hence the birth of the Clone Wars, not fixing by the way, but improving the missed shots that prequels either didn't have room to develop or completely missed. Hence today when I watch these films, I can view Maul and Dooku and Grievous as legitimate characters. Not so much Grievous because the way the Clone Wars treats him. 2003 Grievous still clears. What a monster. Anakin and Obi-Wan's brotherhood feels more driven and layered. Anakin fall feels more tragic given the situations he was put in the Clone Wars. Now watching Revenge of the Sith, it certainly feels like a new and different film. With the Clone Wars in mind obviously, I will always appreciate the prequels despite my feeling for the first two. I enjoy these movies because they feel like classics. The person behind them really cares for the story that's being played. But like I said, sometimes you can put so much effort into something, but you can also be your worst enemy at times. But that's all I got to say. I'm trying a much more different approach to my reviews compared to what I did in the past. Let me know how you feel. Anyways, that's it from me. So yeah, see you on the next one.